Picture a cold morning in 1950s Britain. The school bell hasn't rung yet, but the playground is already silent. Children stand in neat lines, shoes freshly polished, uniforms stiff and scratchy, hands by their sides, no chatting, no fidgeting, just the echo of footsteps in a long corridor and the sharp smell of floor polish hanging in the air. Now imagine being 7 years old and being told exactly how to stand, when to speak, where to look, and when not to move at all. Imagine rules so strict they followed you from the classroom to the dinner hall and even home again in your head. To a child today, it would sound unbelievable. To children back then, it was simply normal. And that's the shocking part. Because these weren't rare punishments or one-off moments. They were everyday rules, quietly shaping childhoods, teaching obedience before imagination, silence before curiosity. Because some of these rules have almost been forgotten, and they changed British childhood forever. To understand why school life felt so controlled in the 1950s, you have to step outside the classroom and into the wider world of post-war Britain. The country was rebuilding not just its streets and homes, but its sense of order. The war had taught people that rules mattered, routines mattered, and doing as you were told could quite literally hold everything together. That way of thinking didn't disappear when peace arrived. It settled quietly into everyday life. Families lived carefully. Nothing was wasted. Time, effort, and behavior were all expected to be sensible and purposeful. Children weren't seen as needing freedom. They were seen as needing guidance. And schools became the place where that guidance was shaped and reinforced. There was a deep respect for authority in those years. Teachers weren't questioned. Their word carried the same weight as a parent's, sometimes more. A classroom wasn't a place for debate or personal expression. It was a training ground for life as it was expected to be lived. Order was comforting. Silence meant seriousness. Uniformity suggested fairness. If everyone followed the same rules, no one stood out, and standing out was rarely encouraged. Schools reflected the Britain of the time, tidy, restrained, and quietly determined. Childhood was expected to fit neatly into that picture. Freedom, playfulness, and individuality came later, if at all. Looking back now, it's easy to be surprised. But in the shadow of war, structure felt safe. And for a whole generation of children, that structure defined what growing up meant. In 1950 schools, the rules didn't stop at the classroom door. They followed you down the corridor, into the playground, and often home again in your thoughts. Children were taught how to sit properly, how to stand properly, even how to walk properly. Back straight, feet still, hands folded. Slouching wasn't just bad manners, it was quietly corrected until good posture became second nature. You learned early that your body was expected to behave as carefully as your words. Moving from one place to another was rarely casual. Lining up was an event in itself. Silence was expected during transitions, with rows moving in unison, shoes scuffing the floor in perfect time. Talking, laughing, or breaking formation felt unthinkable, not because it was cruelly enforced, but because it simply wasn't done. Time was divided into neat, immovable blocks. Bells ruled the day, and every minute had a purpose. Lessons began and ended without discussion. Breaks were short, structured, and supervised. Even play had invisible boundaries that everyone seemed to understand. What's striking now is how natural it all felt then. Children adapted quickly. They learned when to speak, when to wait, and when to stay still. Expression came second to order, and questioning routines wasn't part of childhood vocabulary. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder how much of that discipline shaped confidence, and how much quietly taught children to stay small, blend in, and follow the rhythm set for them. Uniformity was the heart of 1950s school life. From the moment you arrived in the morning to the moment you left, everyone was expected to look, act, and learn in exactly the same way. Clothing was a clear signal of this. Uniforms weren't just about neatness. They were about belonging and blending in. Shoes, socks, jumpers, hair, every detail mattered. There was comfort in knowing no one stood out, but also an unspoken rule. Individuality stayed at home. Lessons followed the same pattern. Children sat in rows facing forward, learning the same material at the same pace. It didn't matter if you learned quickly or struggled quietly, the lesson moved on regardless. Questions were allowed, but only at the right time, in the right way. Curiosity was welcome, so long as it didn't interrupt the order of the room. Routines were rarely explained, just accepted. Morning tasks, afternoon tasks, and day rituals, all repeated so often they became automatic. You didn't choose what you studied or how you learned it. You learned to adapt, to keep up, and to do things the proper way. Compared to today's classrooms, full of choice, discussion, and personal learning styles, it feels almost unbelievable. Yet at the time, it felt fair. Everyone was treated the same. Or at least, that's how it appeared. Only later did many realize how much of themselves they had quietly set aside to fit in. Looking back now, it's easy to focus on what those strict rules took away. The quiet moments when a child wanted to speak but didn't. The ideas left unshared. The laughter held in because it wasn't the right time or place. Childhood, for many, felt careful, measured, always aware of boundaries. And yet, there's another side to remember. For some, those routines created a sense of safety. Knowing exactly what was expected brought comfort. There was pride in getting things right, in neat handwriting, polished shoes, standing smartly in line. Doing well meant fitting in, and fitting in felt like success. Many learned resilience early. They learned patience, self-control, and how to carry on even when something felt difficult or dull. These were qualities that stayed with them for life, quietly shaping how they worked, how they listened, how they endured. But the emotional cost was real, even if it went unnamed at the time. Feelings were rarely discussed. Nervousness, excitement, or frustration were kept inside. Silence wasn't just expected, it became familiar. Perhaps that's why so many memories feel hazy now. Not because they weren't important, but because childhood simply followed the rules, and at the time, no one thought to question them. The video wraps by stepping into a modern classroom, children chatting freely, colorful walls, and teachers encouraging questions. The contrast with the 1950s rigid world is striking. Lessons are more flexible, uniforms optional in many places, and creativity is celebrated. Viewers are invited to reflect. While freedom today feels natural, could such strict, all-encompassing rules ever return? Or was that discipline a product of its time, never to be replicated? The closing question leaves a gentle tension, sparking nostalgia and curiosity. What exactly did we gain and lose when childhood became freer?